Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Life-Changing Stories. My name's Harry Paul. This is Reconciliation Ministries, and we're so glad to have you with us today. I've got a tremendous guest today, a friend of ours, and just a mighty impact. An impactful leader in the body of Christ, Pete Baran. He's the Chief Business Mechanic at Blueneck Consulting, Inc. He's growing up in his family, in his family's business and helping work the family farm, then working for a Fortune 500 companies and running several small businesses. Pete learned firsthand what it takes to grow and run a successful organization. Since 2001, Pete has consulted to executives of government, regulatory bodies, manufacturing, healthcare, and other industries, leading business transformations, high growth projects, mergers, and acquisitions. And in 2011, he started Blueneck Consulting to shift his focus towards helping small business owners, operators, as well as family businesses. His executive experience includes the director of, I want to say this properly, Fujitsu Consulting, director of corporate development for Pasturi Fine Foods, I know that one, CEO of Jurasect Services, Chief Operating Officer of GER Envirotech, and the Regional VP for CGI Information Systems. He has a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of BC and a Certificate of Six Sigma Process Design from Villanova University, and a certificate of high performance leadership from Cornell. He resides currently in Calgary and is married with 5 grown children. God called him to the faith in 2008. And so I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with him. Jen and I actually know him very closely as he now leads from the helm for the Canadian Christian Business Federation. And so glad to have him. And so without further ado, Mr. Pete Baran, great to have you, sir.
Good to see you, Harry. How you doing?
Fantastic. Very well.
Good.
Him and I were just chatting off before we got started, and such a wealth of wisdom. And you know, God has been using you in several different areas. And so thank you again for agreeing to be with us today and agreeing just to share your life-changing story. I'm believing God that our viewers that are watching us today will be impacted by the things that you're sharing, as you've got a very illustrious career, and yet at the same time, such amazing faith experiences. And we had a chance to share that in a Calgary airport, some of them, and I was just blessed by them. And so that's why I'm so glad that you agreed to be with us. So why don't we kick things off first of all? And Pete, would you be so kind to maybe just start with a little bit of preamble of how you came to Christ and your journey of faith a little bit?
Harry, pleasure to be with you today, and thanks for asking me to share this story. I've shared it with a number of people over the years, and every time I tell it, it just doesn't seem to be very real and credible, but it actually happened. I think I mentioned that I grew up in a family where my dad was very, very strongly against faith and religion. And, and that was from growing up during the, very hard times in the prairies. The firstborn son of Ukrainian immigrant parents who were not particularly literate. And they were very poor. And so what he watched is every Sunday, they, with the little money they had, they gave to the church, and occasionally they overgave to the church to the point that he was not able to be looked after by his own parents and was boarded out to another family on the farm to work at the age of 12 years old. So you look at that kind of experience, and it was not a very positive experience. And I'm going to come back to that my dad near the end of the story. So remind me if I don't.
Sure.
And so he was very much against going to the church. And we had a church in our neighborhood, literally a couple of blocks away. And my friends used to go to Sunday school, and I didn't. And my mom got us in a couple of times, but my brother and I, but that was about it. My dad had it. And so it was enough. It was enough for me to be curious about God when I was a kid, but clearly it was an atheist household. It was not very pro God or anything else that had to do with religion. So I kind of, growing up, I read almost nothing from Christianity. I decided to read stuff from Buddhism, the Bhagavad Gita, Judaism, a little bit of Islam, almost everything except Christianity. And yet, somehow, God was continuing to pursue me. My journey towards God actually started when I was in my late teens. I decided to go hiking, and I know, Harry, I told you some stories about places that I've been up in the Rocky Mountains, and some of the peaks that I've been to that he's seen now that he's come and visited out here. But my first hiking experience, the fellow who took my buddy and I up hiking, he said, "Like, I know somebody who hikes. Maybe he can show us how to get up a mountain." So we went with Dave. Turned out that Dave was Pastor Dave. He was a youth pastor, and so we got to talk about God and faith and stuff on my very first hike up a mountain. And this was kind of God's way of continuing to move people in front of me, saying, "I'm here for you when you're ready." But I was a very stubborn, person who really didn't think that religion was for me because that's the way I was brought up. And it was interesting that how God finally had said, like, it's time. I have the three youngest kids that I have are triplets, and they all had slight learning disabilities. And so I was working for a big Fortune 500 and working way too long hours. And my wife was homeschooling the girls because they didn't have enough space for three kids with learning disabilities in the public school system. While we were waiting in Vancouver at the time to be on a waiting list to a school who could accommodate them and look after them. And literally, we had moved up over the year to near the top of the list. We thought we'd be able to get in the next year when my company transferred me to Victoria. And, we were hugely disappointed. I was thinking maybe we should, think about finding another job because the kids were important. Looked around, there wasn't anything. And so with 5 kids to look after, we were moving to Victoria. So I talked to the school we were on the wait list for in Vancouver. And they said, well, there's only one small school in Victoria that may be able to help you out, but, it'd be hard to get into it because it's a small school with limited capacity. So we wrote to them and contacted them, and they sent out an application, and we had to fill it out 3 times for 3 different kids and sent it in and didn't think much of it. But a few weeks later, we got a call from them that says, we'd like you to come in for an interview. So we went, well, that's encouraging. So we went into this very small school that literally had 1 classroom of each grade in elementary school with a maximum student count of 10 per class. And so with 3 girls in 1 grade, we would be taking up about 1/3 of the classroom. And so we're wondering, well, is this going to be real or not? We had this lovely conversation with the teachers and the principal of the school. And much to our great surprise, they said they had room for all 3 girls, just room enough for all 3 girls. So we were very lucky, counting our good fortune, not knowing the background story of this, which I'll get to in a second as well. So as we got the girls into the school in September, and literally within 2 weeks, there was a massive rainstorm, which occasionally happens on the West Coast. But this school, the roof failed, and there was a massive leak, and the school had to shut down. But one of the we got a notice from the school that says, well, we have to shut the building down because it's going to need to be repaired, and there's lots of water damage. But don't fear, because we have another facility we can host all the school in, and it's not the best, but it's large enough, and we can continue on with the year. It happened to be in a church, because it happened to be the teachers were well affiliated with a very large church in the area.
Happened to be a church.
Happened to be, right? So my wife had never been in a church, and I'd never been in a church since I was like 6 years old. That 1 or 2 times I went to kindergarten. So my wife took the girls into the, wandering around this church, finding the back door to a large activity area that they had, and got the girls and met the youth pastor there, a fellow by the name of Pastor Craig, really wonderful young man, who took her by the arm and looked at her and said, "You haven't been here before, have you?" She went, "Nope, I haven't." He said, "Let me take you on a tour." So grabbed her by the arm and took her on a 20-minute tour of the church, and talked to her and asked her about faith and stuff. And she admitted she hadn't been to church before. And so he was very gracious and kind. And at the end of the tour, looked at her very seriously and said, "And you're coming to church on Sunday, aren't you?"
Oh, he's setting you up. Him and God.
So my wife phones me on right after that as she gets in the car, and she said, we're in that church, and I met the youth pastor, and he said, I think we need to go to church, or we might be going to hell or something. She said, "I'm not sure I have a choice, and you're coming with me." And I said, "Okay." So we went to church on Sunday for the first time ever as a family. And as a non-Christian, not growing up in a Christian household, knowing nothing about Christian doctrine, this was probably the most awkward thing we'd ever done as a family. But walking in the door, met just really lovely, welcoming people from our neighborhood, and they were very patient and got us sat down and got the kids off into the kids ministry, and which made us very nervous not to be able to be with our kids. We're wondering what the heck is going on. So we're kind of going along with this, but very uncomfortable. And then listened to this sermon for the first time, and it was interesting. The pastor had done a really interesting job of it, and then at the end of the sermon, it was very thought-provoking. And at the end of the sermon, invited everybody out for coffee in the atrium, and not having our kids with us yet, we decided to wait for them in the atrium, and had a lovely conversation with people. They were very patient and generous and graceful. And we kind of wrapped it up after 20 minutes and got in the car. And my wife and I looked at each other, and she said, "Well, are we going back?" And I went, "I kind of think we should try this another time." So after a couple of more times at the church, we discovered that we were informed that there were in fact Bible study classes that would help us understand what Christianity was all about. We joined those, and the girls continued to go to kindergarten or the preschool, and also into kids ministry on Sunday. And after a while, it kind of felt comfortable. And so after about a year and a half, we decided to get baptized as a family, and we did. And we didn't turn back after that. Now, let me tell you the backstory on that one.
Okay.
So the specialty school that looks after, kids with learning disabilities, one thing I didn't know is that the propensity for learning disabilities is about 2 times higher in boys than it is in girls. Mm-hmm. And so this school had a very large number of learning challenged young boys. And the teachers happened to all be very strong Christians. And they didn't they didn't advertise it into the school, but they prayed together as a faculty, and they went to church together as a faculty, and they were very strong Christians. And it was a very tough financial situation because they're running a very small school with very limited resources. And so it just so happened in that particular grade, it was grade 5, that 3 of the boys, for a variety of reasons, dropped out of the program at the end of grade 4. 2 of them were moving away. One of them was decided to move into the public school because he felt comfortable moving, had made some good progress. So they had this big hole in the grade 5. And so the principal and the teachers got together and they prayed for girls to fill those 3 spots. And they prayed for 2 solid weeks when our application for 3 girls for grade 5 came in the door. So we were the answer to their prayer requests.
Wow.
And, and it was God's way of also guiding us into the church by punching a hole in the roof of the church and sending us, or the school, and sending us to Sunday school and church for 6 weeks while the roof was being fixed, and brought us to God through that series of events. So, sometimes you'll wonder whether or not God is really pursuing you or not. He pursues you, and sometimes he pursues you in a very clear, distinct way. And so that's kind of how we came to God as a family. And the girls ended up, when we moved to Calgary, they ended up going to Bearscroft Christian School and graduating with honors from that Christian school. So we're very proud of them. A couple of them went on to university and have done very, very well. Wow. Now, I also promised you, Harry, that I'd go back to my dad, who is...
Yeah, I was just going to say, go back to Dad. Let's hear about that.
So my dad was very strongly against the church, and he would rant against the church and how terrible these people were for all of his life. And about 20 years ago, my mom passed away, and my dad was left by himself. And my brother and I knew that there's no way that he'd do well by himself, and there's no way he was going in a home. He was feeling quite healthy and doing well, although he really wasn't, and we didn't know it at the time. So my brother and I talked together and said, look, my brother wasn't in a position to look after my dad or move him in. And so my wife and I were. So we went as a family to him and, fought and argued and in a loving way to try and get him to give up his home and move in with us. And he eventually did. So now he's moved into this household of people who do go to church, but he didn't like the idea. Turned out that moving in with us was a very, very important step forward because he was diagnosed later with bowel cancer and colon cancer, and so he was dying, and he was 90 years old, and so surgery was almost not an option at that age. By the time they had diagnosed it, it was starting to metastasize, and it was pretty serious. And so I had conversations with Dad about a number of things, and it just so happens that I had a cousin in the area that was a Christian missionary. Yes, a Christian missionary. And he and his wife were just lovely people. And so I talked to my cousin Ed, and he said, well, invite him to see whether or not he'd just say hi to us. We'd like to come by and just say hello to him. So they did, and started to visit him and talk about God and do their evangelistic thing that they're very good at. And my dad, showed some interest, and they had a number of really deep private conversations that I was not part of. And they prayed for him, and they prayed over him. And after a few months, my dad's health was going down. He was getting to the point that, you know, it was not going to go well. And he ended up in the hospital one night, and they were trying to resuscitate him, and they did. He was not doing well. His heart had stopped as well. And my wife came to, you know, they got him up and running, and my wife went to the hospital, and I was out of town working. Unfortunately, it was a terrible thing. So she gets to the hospital room, and my dad is freaked out and getting his clothes on and saying, "We're getting out of here. We're getting out of here now." And so my wife goes, "What's going on? You shouldn't be leaving the hospital. You almost died." He's going, "No, I can't stay here another moment." And gets home, and he relaxes, and he tells her this story. He tells me the same story, which is, while he was there in the hospital bed alone, he saw Satan sitting on the counter laughing at him.
Wow.
And he saw demons wandering the hallway looking for souls that they could take.
Wow.
And this is not a religious man.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he spent serious time with my cousin afterwards and talk through the situation and talk through his personal experience, and decided to give his life to Jesus as well. So in his 90s, dying of cancer, being given this vision of what his end could look like, he decided to turn to Christ and accept him in his life. And he died about 6 weeks later with everyone around him, his family, loving and praying over him. And he died peacefully, comfortably, knowing that God was going to take him to his eternal home. So you want to talk about interesting testimonies.
That's amazing.
You know, there's, you know, my own personal one, which almost seems unbelievable, and God's relentless pursuit of me and my family, but also how that connection also helped save my dad. You know, a man who is not ever going to be saved as far as he knew.
Wow, that blesses me. And I, you know, I was going to say that I was so blessed to hear again about how the school admission, those 3 spots had opened up for your girls. That blessed my heart to know that as God was trying to reach you and bless you eternally, right, through salvation, he had used you as a blessing for that school. And I thought that was amazing. But that's that story with your dad, that really cuts to the heart, because so many people that are watching right now could probably identify with their burning desire to see a loved one transformed, to see a loved one changed. And then there are other viewers that are watching that are, you know, elderly or older up in age, and they think it's too late for them. But what you just shared, oh, it just blessed me.
It is never too late, you know. And, you know, there's that biblical parable about the workers in the field. And the story about it is, for those of you who aren't Christian and don't know that story, the bottom line is that, you know, God is generous and keeps his word to you, that no matter when you come, you are welcome, and you will get a full measure of reward.
Wow, that's awesome. In the last few minutes that we have here, we've got about 6 or 7 minutes. I wanted to sort of ask you two major things. Well,
Sure.
One small thing. I wanted to go back to Pete and his wonderful wife, the day they were at the church for the first time, and they decided to go into the atrium. And I want to get a little insight. What was that conversation like? And more specifically around what made you come back the second time?
And that's a really good question. I think one of the great blessings I have is that because I never grew up in the church and never, it was never part of my life, you know, I have a real appreciation for how odd and uncomfortable it is to walk into a church. And so, for people who have never done it or have done it very infrequently, you know what I'm talking about. There's a whole different language and terminology that is completely foreign that you don't know about. There's a deep a deep ignorance of what other people know around you that makes you feel a little uncomfortable, that you can't participate potentially in the conversations. And what I found that was so amazing, that's different from a lot of the secular world and a lot of social gatherings that I've had to participate in for work and work related things in Fortune 500s, is that the people I met in the atrium of the church didn't seem to have an ego. They were genuinely interested in just getting to know us. They were lighthearted. They didn't seem to be burdened by the world in the same way that so many of the people I knew. They were just different in kind of a peaceful way that, here was a whole room of people that were genuinely relaxed, confident in their lives, not needing to promote themselves, interested in hearing how everybody else's lives were going, and that and black coffee and cheap pastries.
I love that.
And we kind of looked at it and went, there's a community of people here that seem to have an open door to us, that didn't seem to want anything from us except for us to be there.
Wow.
And for those of you who are non-Christians, you know what I mean. That every time you walk in a room, there's posturing, there's puffery, there's, can I trust you? Can you trust? How can I get you to trust me? Is there something I can get from you? Is there something you can get from me? There's this transactional nature of human relationships that always, to some degree, underlies a lot of human interactions. Didn't happen in that church. And it was just such an enormous contrast to what my normal business life was, that it threw us completely off. And we went, I don't know what this is, and I'm not even sure that it's real, but we're coming back to find out. And that's what it was,
Wow. That's
so
beautiful.
just being Christian is one of the best ways to recruit other people to Christianity.
Oh, that blesses my heart. That blesses my heart. That's awesome. Well, in the last couple of moments we have, I really want to give you some liberty here, Pete. Anybody that's watching, as your heart is led, whether it's a prayer or just some type of takeaway you want to make sure people get out of today, why don't you go ahead and just leave something impactful for people in terms of what they can take from your testimony.
I think the number one thing that I'd like everybody to take away, at least to consider, is that we are all called to God personally, but we're also called to help others to find their way to God. And we often think that that's we have to do it in some bold way of potentially standing on street corners, introducing ourselves to people, or somehow, talking to people about God who don't want to hear about God. What I'm going to be encouraging everybody to do is that for some of you, you are blessed with the ability to do that, and you should use it. But for many of us, the best way we can bring people to God is not by being forward with it, but by being attractive to them. And what I mean by that is to truly live in a way of forgiveness and grace and kindness in a way, in such an extreme way that people look at you and say, why are you different? And that gives you that opportunity to open up and share your faith in God and why you are different, why you believe what you believe, and how that makes you a different person and how that can make them a different person. And that, I think, is an easy thing to do. And it's the thing that all those people in that church atrium did for my wife and I. They didn't sit there and share their faith in our first meeting. They just welcomed us with kindness and grace. And we can all, as Christians, do more of that.
Amazing. I completely agree with you, Pete. And hey, if you're watching and what Pete has said really resonated with you, well, that's awesome, because that's what we're here for. And so why don't you go to our website, reconciliationministries.ca, more great content, more great stories like Pete, so that you can hear how others have been touched by the grace of God, by the love of Jesus Christ, and hey, even by the kindness of the church. And hey, if you've got any questions, reach out to us. We're so glad to be with you today. And Pete, oh man, I want to have you back, man. I want to have you back, because we haven't even heard about how God has used you in business and what life looked like after that marvelous experience. But I'm so glad that you got a chance to share about your dad as well. And so thanks again for being here, Pete. My
pleasure.
We really appreciate you. All right. Well, friends,
Thanks,
for those of you that are looking for more great content, visit our YouTube channel anytime. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can be a blessing to more people. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.